What happens when a young, arrogant waiter mocks a seemingly ordinary couple for splitting the bill? The twist will leave you speechless, because the very people he looked down on are about to change his life in ways he never saw coming. The restaurant was buzzing with energy, a sleek, upscale spot nestled in the heart of the city. The soft hum of conversations blended with the clink of fine china and the occasional laugh from a nearby table. Waiters in crisp uniforms moved gracefully through the dining room, expertly weaving between tables, delivering plates of meticulously prepared dishes. Tom, a young waiter with a noticeable air of confidence, surveyed the scene from his position behind the bar. His uniform was always perfectly pressed, and his hair was styled in a way that seemed to say, "I know what I'm doing." He prided himself on knowing the menu inside and out and considered himself the expert when it came to providing the perfect dining experience. His job wasn't just a job, it was a performance, and he was the star. As he scanned the room, his gaze fell on a couple entering the restaurant. They didn't fit the usual crowd. Sarah and James, mid-30s, walked in looking a bit out of place. They weren't dressed in the designer outfits or the tailored suits typical of the clientele who frequented this restaurant. Sarah wore a simple blouse and jeans, while James had on a polo and khakis. They seemed nice enough, but their casual attire caught Tom's eye immediately. With a polite but somewhat aloof smile, Tom approached their table, taking his usual position with a confident stance. "Good evening, welcome to Lux Bistro," he said, his tone smooth but carrying an air of superiority. "I'll be your server this evening. Can I start you off with a drink?" Sarah and James exchanged a quick glance before Sarah spoke. "We'll just start with some water, please." Tom nodded, already mentally deciding what they'd order, a couple of the less expensive options, no doubt. As they looked over the menu, Tom waited impatiently, tapping his pen on his notepad. Finally, they made their choices, a well-priced appetizer and a couple of mains from the mid-range section. As he returned to take their order, Sarah gave him a smile. "Oh, and we'll be splitting the bill tonight," she added. Tom raised an eyebrow, suppressing a scoff. "You want to split the bill?" he repeated, his tone dripping with incredulity. "Interesting choice. Not something we normally see here." He hid the disdain behind a thin smile, already thinking to himself that these two were probably just out for a quick, cheap bite. Certainly not the type to appreciate the finer dining experience he'd worked so hard to perfect. As the evening went on, Tom's initial judgment of Sarah and James only deepened. Every time he checked on them, he couldn't help but notice how out of place they seemed in the lavish setting. Their casual attire, their polite but unassuming demeanor, it all screamed cheap in Tom's eyes. In his mind, they didn't belong here, and he was certain that the split bill comment was just a cover for their lack of funds. Under his breath, Tom muttered to himself as he headed back to the kitchen. "Figures. Can't even pay for a full meal together. How tacky," he sneered, rolling his eyes. It wasn't the first time he'd judged a customer based on their appearance or the way they dined, and it probably wouldn't be the last. In his eyes, splitting the bill was a sign of frugality, something he saw as beneath the class of this fine establishment. As the night wore on, Tom's behavior became more and more evident. When Sarah and James asked for a refill on their drinks, he forgot to bring them over for nearly 20 minutes. When they requested the side dish to be swapped out for something else, Tom acted like it was an unreasonable demand, rolling his eyes as he walked away. Every interaction seemed tinged with passive-aggressive sarcasm, whether it was the overly long wait for their food or the way he dropped the plates down with a slight thud. He wasn't making their experience miserable outright, but his little actions, his aloofness, the dismissive comments, added up. When it was finally time for the bill, Tom couldn't resist making one last jab. As he handed it over with a forced smile, he said, "Here you go. I've made sure to break everything down for you, just the way you like it." His voice was laced with mock politeness, but his eyes betrayed his true feelings. The couple looked at him briefly but said nothing, clearly aware of the slight. Sarah and James exchanged a glance, but they remained calm, not letting Tom's behavior ruin their evening. It was clear they weren't happy with the treatment, but they didn't show it. They simply paid the bill and left, Tom still standing at the counter, too absorbed in his own judgment to notice the quiet dignity with which they left. The evening passed by, and Tom continued his routine, moving from table to table with his usual mix of confidence and quiet judgment. Sarah and James finished their meal, leaving behind an empty plate that had once held their carefully selected entrees. They spoke in low tones, the conversation light, even though Tom could sense a certain distance between them and the atmosphere around them. It was almost as if they had become used to the subtle dismissals, like they were used to being treated differently, even in places that claimed to offer the finest dining experience. When the check was placed in front of them, Sarah and James didn't hesitate. They took a moment, their fingers brushing over the total, but didn't appear to debate anything. Tom stood near the bar, keeping an eye on them as they handled the bill. A part of him expected them to leave without tipping, especially after the way he'd treated them. But when they finally stood up, Sarah quietly left a modest tip, a small one, perhaps just enough to cover the basics, certainly not in line with what Tom had expected from regular customers. In his mind, he sneered. It seemed only fitting. Cheap, he muttered under his breath, watching them leave. He was convinced they didn't know what real class was, or how to behave in a proper restaurant. They were, in his eyes, just another pair of customers looking for a quick bite on a budget. He couldn't help but feel superior, like he was the one with the real taste, the one who understood the value of fine dining and what it took to appreciate it. As Sarah and James made their way toward the exit, Tom barely acknowledged them, his eyes fixed on the tip they had left. He had already moved on to the next table, already forgetting about them. They were just another couple, in a sea of faces that came and went. They passed through the restaurant doors, stepping out into the night air, and Tom didn't think much of it. He figured they'd never return, just another group who didn't quite fit in, and the whole night would soon be forgotten. A few weeks later, the atmosphere at Luxe Bistro was buzzing with excitement. It was an unusually busy afternoon for a Wednesday, with the staff moving quickly and customers chatting excitedly about rumors they had overheard. Tom had just finished his shift when he caught snippets of the chatter. A major announcement was coming. The owners, who had always kept a low profile, were planning something big. There were whispers of a change in ownership, but no one knew for sure. Tom wasn't too concerned. He was just relieved to be getting off work and looking forward to the end of the day. As he stepped into the staff lounge to take a quick break, the door to the dining area opened, and in walked Sarah and James. Tom froze. The couple he had so casually dismissed was now standing in the doorway, but this time, they weren't dressed in casual clothes. No, today they wore sharp business attire. Tailored suits, crisp shirts, and the kind of confidence that only comes from knowing exactly where you stand. Before Tom could even register what was happening, Sarah smiled and confidently approached the center of the room, with James right beside her. "Good afternoon, everyone," Sarah began, her voice calm but authoritative. "We're Sarah and James, and we're thrilled to announce that we are the new owners of Luxe Bistro." Tom's heart skipped a beat. His mind raced. Was he hearing this right? The couple he had mocked, the ones he'd looked down on for being cheap, were now the ones in charge? He struggled to keep his composure as they continued, explaining how they had bought the restaurant from the original owners, who had been looking to retire. They were taking over, and they had big plans to modernize and improve the place. Tom's jaw dropped as he realized the gravity of the situation. The people he had treated with such disdain were now his bosses. The realization hit him hard. His judgment had been not only wrong, but also incredibly foolish. He forced a smile as they made their way to greet the staff, but he couldn't shake the deep sense of regret and humiliation gnawing at him. Sarah and James extended their hands, offering friendly greetings, but Tom couldn't escape the discomfort that clouded the moment. He was now standing face to face with the couple he'd thought so little of. Now the very people who held his future in their hands. As Sarah and James made their way around the room, introducing themselves to the staff and discussing the restaurant's new direction, Tom found himself standing awkwardly off to the side, the weight of his past behavior hanging over him like a cloud. When Sarah and James finally made their way to him, the tension was palpable. They greeted him politely, but there was no denying the discomfort in the air. "Tom," Sarah said, her tone calm but firm. "We've heard some things about your behavior when you served us last time. To say we were disappointed would be an understatement. We don't tolerate that kind of attitude here." Tom's face flushed with embarrassment. His mind raced, but he couldn't bring himself to speak. He had no defense for the way he had treated them. It was clear now that his behavior was not just unprofessional, but downright disrespectful. James continued, "We're not going to fire you right away. But we want you to understand that this kind of behavior will not be tolerated going forward. You're here to provide a great experience for our customers, not to judge them based on how they look or how they choose to pay." Tom nodded, feeling smaller with every word. He wanted to apologize, but the words felt stuck in his throat. He had always prided himself on being a good server, but in that moment, he realized how wrong he had been. His judgment had clouded his ability to truly see the people in front of him, reducing them to nothing more than stereotypes. As the meeting ended and Sarah and James began discussing their plans for the restaurant's future, Tom couldn't shake the regret gnawing at him. He stood there, silently reflecting on the arrogance that had led him to treat others with such disdain. He realized with growing clarity that appearances could be deceiving. You could never truly know someone's story based on what they wore or how they acted on the surface. As Sarah and James laid out their vision for the restaurant, emphasizing a new focus on customer care and respect, Tom felt a sense of unease mixed with gratitude. He wasn't sure what his future held, but one thing was certain: he would never forget the lesson that had been handed to him so harshly. His journey was about to change, and it would start with learning to treat everyone with the respect they deserved, no matter who they were. In the weeks that followed the meeting with Sarah and James, Tom's behavior began to shift. It wasn't an immediate transformation, but the change was noticeable. At first, he was quiet, reflecting deeply on his past actions, but slowly he began to adopt a more humble attitude. Gone were the snide remarks and the dismissive looks. Tom started treating every customer with the same level of respect, whether they were dressed in designer clothes or in a simple t-shirt. He no longer made assumptions based on appearances. He learned to listen to their needs, to engage with them with genuine care, and most importantly, to give them the best service possible without judgment. Tom found himself going out of his way to make every customer feel valued, offering them thoughtful recommendations, taking extra care in remembering their preferences, and ensuring they felt like the most important people in the room. It was a subtle shift, but one that made a huge difference, not just in the way his customers responded to him, but in how he felt about himself. One day, Sarah and James stopped by his section during a busy dinner rush, and Tom couldn't help but feel a sense of pride when they praised his work. "You're doing great, Tom," Sarah said, smiling warmly. "We're happy to see how much you've grown." Tom smiled back, his heart light. "Thank you," he replied, the weight of his earlier arrogance long gone. He had learned a lesson he would carry with him for the rest of his life. The story ended with a simple yet powerful realization. Appearances can be deceiving, and you never know who you're dealing with. The couple who had once been the target of his mockery had not only become his bosses, but it also helped him become a better person. It reminded him of the importance of kindness. Treating others with respect, no matter their background, was the true mark of strength. Sometimes, the people you least expect can turn out to be the ones who change your life forever. And that lesson, learned the hard way, would stay with Tom for good.